everybody. Good evening, my dear friend Adnan. It's indeed a privilege to have been asked to engage in this conversation this evening with our partners, Kenyan Institute and Dar es-Saaf and the Educational Bookstore. You might have heard, some of you, of the Khalidi Library, of which I'm a custodian, and we're also trying to do our share in reviving in the Renaissance, in the cultural Renaissance, let's say, that we're trying to all work for in Jerusalem. And to be honest, it's not because of that, but it's that I was happy to accept this invitation to discuss Adnan's latest book, but it's quite simply because me and Adnan go back a long time. We were both United Nations officials working on, each one of us, our Palestinian files. Me as an economist, him as a political scientist. We both have indirect links to Jerusalem. Adnan through, of course, his lovely wife Zakiya, and me as well, of course, as his work with the Orient House and Faisal Husseini and other things which we needn't go into, and me because of my origins, my father being from Jerusalem. People say, oh, you've come back. So I have come to live in Jerusalem, in Palestine, since 2013, after having been born in New York, as you can gather, and lived in, not Westchester. Anyhow, born in the United States and lived in Beirut and the United Kingdom and Europe for most of my life. So yes, I have made my aliyah, I suppose. I haven't returned in literally sense. I suppose that this part of my family has come back to Palestine. Anyhow, so what I wanted to say is that there are many reasons that Adnan and I should be sitting together at this table and discussing, not least of which is the subject matter in particular of his book and his research. And those of you who know Adnan know how long and how hard he worked, I would say since the late 80s at least, but especially in the 1990s, on the documentation and ensuring a scientific and rigorous and comprehensive documentation of lost or confiscated Arab Palestinian properties in Palestine. So his work, he mentions it very modestly in the bio in this book, but in fact, were it not for Adnan and his ability and his position in the United Nations to make sure that things happened, the United Nations Special Commission on Palestine's property records, which were compiled in 1950 and were held for, did not see the light of day until the efforts which Adnan was involved in, and Ahlan Adnan number our next. Those efforts culminated in that digitization of those files, and now they are safely in Palestinian hands, for better or for worse, but at least, and most importantly, the exact information about the scale of the loss that was incurred 70 years ago. At least we have exactly all the documents that we need, both for posterity's sake and let's hope for actually doing something about that. And that takes me to the point of the Arab architectural renaissance in the western part of occupied Jerusalem. As you've seen, the photos of these houses, the nature, I mean, there's many angles which we'll talk about now, but I think what I think about all the time as an economist, whenever I drive through Palestine, inside Israel or inside the West Bank, and you calculate what is saved by the state of Israel by just appropriating this sort of property. I mean, to rebuild any of these houses that you see here would cost millions and millions. The property on which they rest is worth millions and millions, and that applies to settlements in the West Bank. It applies to the very vast areas of Palestine that were expropriated. So it's no wonder that Israel is held up as an economic miracle. When you have that sort of basic capital for free, it makes a big difference as to how you position yourself. So we are all very grateful that in the case of this precious cultural heritage in Western Jerusalem, we've had Adnan make sure that in Arabic first and now in English, the material is out there. He's documented it. There's nothing that can be said to refute the facts that he has presented. However, I don't want to speak, and I'd like him to say what he'd like to say, but the idea here is that this is a discussion. So I'm going to try and move this forward by asking questions which will lead, I think, to interesting comments by Adnan on the book and on the issues raised in the book. So for me, I mean, the first question, I have a few, but the first question, Adnan, but you can say anything you wish before that, is why did you write this book?
First of all, thank you, Raja. You are welcome all. I'm glad and delighted to see you in this delayed event. This is not working?
I don't know.
Anyway. Actually, this book is not the entire or even 5% of what we did on those properties and others. I will come later on, maybe, Raja, if you tolerate this, I will answer your question why I wrote the book after I present some of the findings of the book. Why people left the old city, at what time they left the old city. Jerusalem, until the late period of the Ottoman Empire, was totally, exclusively in the old city. The gate of the old city was closed around 6 o'clock, and people could not leave after 6 o'clock, the old city. But the old city, especially the last 50 years of the Ottoman Empire, was prosperous, and together with being prosperous, the old city has become very crowded. There are many reasons why people left the old city to live or to build or to reconstruct their houses outside the old city. There are, of course, urban constraints. First of all, the land for constructing building was exhausted. No more land for additional buildings. The population overcrowded. There is migration, internal migration from outside the city into the old city, and in certain time,
that's fine.
there was influx of Jewish immigrants from the north, who suffered, and Tiberias, who suffered from chronic diseases in those areas and came to find a shelter in the old city. So those are really the urban constraints. And of course, like any other old cities in the world, gradually the city went from inside into outside. And we know that in the West, the affluent people will leave the center to the periphery, and those years, those days, people come back to centers because of the coast, etc. In Jerusalem is not different than other cities. People were in need to find additional space, and particularly the Jewish pilgrims, immigrants who were financed to come and live in the city. Second factor is the affluent Arabs of the old city, the affluent families who wanted to enjoy their richness and who want to built their own expanded houses. They started with small individual dwellings, houses, summer houses, because at the beginning it was difficult to live and not safe to live outside the walls. So they built here and there some houses. And thirdly, and more very notable, is the huge drive, huge campaign of Christian international institutions to resettle, to rebuild. I will dare to say they are here, or to have the second peaceful crusaders into Jerusalem. Now I have to mention this because those factors affected, and we have here Ustaz Adnan Hosseini, engineer, affected the type of constructions that we have outside the walls. We have three types outside. We have Ahmed. Yes, please. We have the extensive and dozens of Jewish neighborhoods, very crowded, very poor, hasty built, and massive population. Those houses, until now, if you go to Me'asharim or you go to other places, you see how much those buildings were crowded, comparing to the right side, the Arab constructions outside the walls. Actually, I can use this. Me'asharim and other Jewish settlements were built to accommodate families who initially were not Zionist settlers, who came for religious reasons to be close to the holy places and to die in the holy places. For instance, in Me'asharim structure, the largest family will have 2 bedrooms, and the facilities, the kitchen and the rest in the inner yards. There was inner yards with the bathroom, kitchens, and etc. Can you move, please? You see those, and this is the Muslims. What says that northern Jerusalem beyond the walls, and you see those buildings with spaces, and this is the northwest with the Jewish neighborhoods. Can you move? Move on. Here, for instance, the Sheikh Jarrah building some castles, huge houses, and this is an Israeli neighborhood with those massive buildings and crowded buildings. Here's another Jewish neighborhood. Most of you is familiar with this. This is they call it the Maruha, Montefiore area, and you see it's like this Me'asharim. Sorry, it's Me'asharim. Me'asharim, but is the photo clear?
It's the light. Because we turned the light on.
You can take the light.
ارجع. اوكي بس هو كان بده عشان طيب take the lights back off. Please. خفف الضوء.
Okay. This is Sheikh Jarrah, and this is Me'asharin. Go on. This is American College, the Orient House. This is Rabah House, and this is Ismail Beg House, and this is Montefiore. And those are the types of constructions were built toward the end of the Ottoman Empire. There's another one. Oh, this is, yeah. Now, a third type of buildings, third type of constructions in the international Christian institutions. Huge buildings, European style, spacey, richly financed, and until now you see them occupy the highland space of Jerusalem. This is the Russian compound, and this is only part of the Russian compound. To the right and to the left, they are supportive building. Go ahead. Schmidt School. You see, even the Salah ad-Din was not paved. This is the pre-paved Salah ad-Din Street. Schmidt Street was not built to be school, was built to be hostel, was to be place where pilgrims come to live or to stay alone during the time of prayer. Notre Dame, 600 rooms for pilgrims, huge, French of course, huge building, still beautiful, was occupied a quarter of the western side of the walls. This is a huge building. Right. This is the Italian hospital in Me'asharim, close to Me'asharim. One of the really beautiful buildings that came. I'll say a few things about those. Go ahead. This is the Habashi Ethiopian church. There's inside this beautiful building. This is on the street, and I could not go inside, and the door, the gate was closed, and they said no. So I did this. That's it. Now I want to say something about how it was possible to build those. The Ottoman Empire was claiming that the entire Jerusalem land is Waqf land, and no non-Ottoman residents can buy or rent the land. And then we have history repeated itself, the Crimea War, whereby the Russian launched an attack on Crimea. By the way, Crimea, they spell it differently in different places. We call it Al-Kurum, Crimea. The Russian authorities had a conflict with the French authority over Jerusalem, who will represent the Christian in Palestine and in Jerusalem. And at one point, the Ottoman authorized the French or the European to represent the Christians. Then Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire and invaded this island. 4 years of war, by 1852 to 56. Then certain European Western powers came to the help of the Ottomans. After which the Ottoman had what they call it land reform, land registration reform. We call that period of the capitulation when the Ottoman Empire feel death for those Europeans. So they authorized, with the reform, land reform, authorized residents of those countries who helped the Ottomans to buy land, giving that the consulate of those countries will approve it, will sign it. So, for instance, Mea Sharim was not bought by a Jewish or local list. It was bought by residents from several countries, including Austria, England, France, Russia, and local. It is until now, Mea Sharim is registered under the names Austrian, German, Russian, English subjects, of course, with the support of the consulate. So the Jewish community and the international Christian institutions were able to start building toward the end of the Ottoman Empire due to the land reform that took place in 1858, but practically in 1886. I'm saying that because it's clear that from architectural point of view, the move from the old city into the new city was under constraints and affected by the political decisions, political settings during the Ottoman Empire was clearly affected by land registration and land transactions. Now, for the Arab constructions, which is the affluent constructions, they were not massive neighborhoods. The massive neighborhoods, and this is the subject of the book, came later on after the 1917, 1918, actually after the First World War, where people felt safe and they could build outside the building. Now, what I did is I surveyed the entire land of Jerusalem and served the entire development of the constructions and building neighborhoods and small semi-neighborhoods. The book is concentrate on 12 neighborhoods, Palestinian neighborhoods. Now, if you look at the map, and we have it, the statistic we have it in the Arabic book is more clear which neighborhoods are Jewish and which are Palestinian Arabs and which are mixed. I made it the easy way. I took those 12 who are predominantly Arab Palestinians neighborhoods. The history of those neighborhoods is simple. Old city has become crowded. There is a change from the Ottoman Empire era into the Mandate era, for the positive and for the negative. For the positive, it has become more safe. to move out of the old city, but also as concerning city planning has become more in order, and particularly the building construction material has become more available and in better quality than it used to be. So those neighborhoods were built gradually, starting in the early 20s, actually in the 46 already, they stopped constructing those buildings. I'll come to the history of what happened later on. But what I call it, why I call it Renaissance, why I call it this, those buildings were unique in terms of their size, style, material, and I mentioned some of those. For instance, the location of those buildings. The Baqa Valley started from Bab al-Khalil, Jaffa Gate. If you keep going until the beginning of Bethlehem is one Baqa. Not Bika, but Baqa. It was empty land, but also was not safe land, was wineland, but then gradually the area has become a very rich area and flat area, and it was easy and simple, but also possible to build on those areas because not only almost all of those lands were owned by Palestinians, so they could buy and purchase also. Secondly, the size of the lot on the houses. Arab houses built in those neighborhoods, in comparing with the Jewish houses built in this. The Arab houses, per house, they had 1.44 dunam, square dunam, 1.44 dunam per house, while the Jewish constructions in the West Jerusalem, in the area, in the new areas, was 0.55 square meters. The average size of the house in those neighborhoods was 335.8 square meter. Average size of the house, 333 square meters. And if this not is the hard, I don't know what else. Average size of Jewish house was 100 square meters. The style. The houses of in those neighborhoods were Oriental features and 19th century neoclassical classical style with more modern technical means, meaning they continue the Middle East and the style of the Middle East, Islamic and Arabic style, but with modern technical issue. It was the efforts to integrate Islamic and Mediterranean style with modern functional requirements. Chapter 5 of the book has the entire thing on the style. The homes often illustrated by highly individualized architectural detail, the creative stone cutting around doors and windows, the style of the facade of the houses, elaborate stonework. Much of the gray or colored stone used in these personal family houses came from limestone quarries in the Jerusalem area. It is the stone of Jerusalem area is very known, very in Palestine and outside Palestine. In some cases, pink limestone was used in systematic ends of trimming windows and door frames, balconies, and corners. These houses together formed a garden city as they consisted mainly of villas surrounded by gardens. This is why I call it the Renaissance. This is why I think if you today, and I went into this issue, Jerusalem today, real estate is problematic. On one hand, there is encouragement by the Israeli government and pushing for the people to come and live in Jerusalem. On the other hand, the space is limited. So we have the settlements, but in Jerusalem itself, real estate has become something that not everybody can afford. Today, not today, for some years now, rich Jewish, French, American, Europeans come to Jerusalem, buy those Arab houses, renovate them, and becoming another castles and renovated houses in Jerusalem. I went to real estate to see the prices, Beit el-Jamal, something, and I was there when it was sold. It's 2 levels, 2 floors. By the first floor, $7 million. The second floor, $12 million. This is the range of the prices of those Arab houses in Talbi, in Katamon, and Yunani, Greek Person, and German colony, and others. The price or price list of those houses has become a phenomenon, very noticeable. So if Raja talks about the value, it is impossible today to reach the value. Now I want to go to the maybe the political issue, and then I will come to answer you why I wrote this book.
Okay.
Jerusalem, like other cities of Palestine, was cleansing during the 1940s. But Jerusalem was unique. And all the time I mentioned, when I come to Jerusalem, I say in Arabic, Bidda Altum. Bidda Altum, I want to beat myself, because what happened in the western part of Jerusalem, unbelievable. It is a historical phenomenon. During few days, 40 to 50 people were out.
40 to 50,000.
40 to 50,000 people were out of those places. Of course, if you ask me what are the circumstances, was Deir Yassin massacre, and mostly the death of Abdelkader al-Husseini. The death of Abdelkader al-Husseini left the battle over Jerusalem with no leadership. The citizen, the simple citizen, those like your family and other families who left, felt unsafe to stay. And then the Irgun and part of the Haganah made a campaign, a good campaign, very strong campaign, with arms and this, go from house to house and give them 2-3 hours to leave. And people have panicked and left 45,000 people leaving in a few days without them. Now, I have some statistic in this. We had all together what we lost in with Jerusalem. I don't want to continue much about this because I want this question answered. Jerusalem the mandated Jerusalem was close to 20,000 square kilometers or 20,000 dunams of land. The Armistice Agreement between Jordan and Israel in 1949 left the western part close to 17,000, 16 plus thousand square kilometer, and 2,200 square kilometer for the eastern part of Jerusalem. The property, Palestinian Arab property, in that western part of the occupied Jerusalem was and still count for more than 35% of the entire property, 30% for the Jewish population, 15 to 18% for international Christian institution, and the rest roads and services. What happened to those houses? What eating my heart when I look at this? Ahmed will show us some few photos. Okay, this is one moment. This is the house of Kamli House in the edge between Nammariye and Talbiye. Levi Eshkol, later on Prime Minister, lived in this house more than 10-15 years. Then when he was appointed or elected to Prime Minister, has to leave, and he claimed in a press conference that he never knew that this is an Arab house. Okay? This is the same Eshkol who was in charge of the Jewish agency, in charge of resettling those Arab properties. He said, what a revelation. He looked at those in the Galilee, those villages, a revelation. And he acknowledged it is something even beyond him, and he was in charge of resettling those houses. And he come and live in this beautiful house of Kamli, who lived in a hurry to search for censure or for a shelter for their children. Golda Meir was foreign minister, but before that was the labor minister. During her time as a minister, she lived in this Wasif Psharat house, close to it, his brother Hanna Psharat. Wasif Psharat house. There was a sign upstairs called up the roof called Harun al-Rashid. This house was named Harun al-Rashid. And people from Jordan, Syria, Lebanon came to see this Harun al-Rashid house. The one and the only Harun al-Rashid house. Golda Meir lived in this house. And Golda Meir, when he became Prime Minister, he said, what Palestinians? What Palestine? No Palestinian. I am a Palestinian, not you. Go ahead. Olmert, a simple story. Olmert did not buy the house. Friend of Olmert bought the house, and he pretended that he owned the house from the guy. Officially, he owned this house. This is for the Nammari family. A small story. When I was taking photos, sorry for being long, but taking photos. And one morning I went to take a photo of that Olmert. He was deputy prime minister. That night, they rushed Sharon into the hospital, who was prime minister. And immediately, of course, they considered formally Olmert as the acting prime minister. I was, walking, taking photos, and then a massive force of police, border forces, army, surrounding the area, and then I realized that in few seconds I'll be beaten up to death if you see me taking photos of this house. I ran away like a rat, not to be caught taking photo of the house. Mr. Netanyahu. His father was, as you know, some of you know, he was the secretary or head of the office of Jabotinsky. He was, the managing officer of Jabotinsky. And he lived abroad. When he came, he lived in this house. Netanyahu and his Yoni and sister were raised in this house.
Where is it?
The registration is very, very strange things. The registration was considered as Jewish house. I said, no, it's not a Jewish house. I asked normally who come to this, Danny Robinson, he took a lawyer, he went to the municipality, and they gave him the information. This house was built by Albina, constructor Jerusalem, and was sold to the late Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan. Tawfiq Kanaan never lived in this house. He has a castle, beautiful house in Mamila. He rented to military officers. Once the military officer left, the Jewish authorities got in, they considered it a Jewish property. So this is the Albina built house and Tawfiq Kanaan house. Mr. Netanyahu and his family were living in this house. This is the last one. Now, why bother? And I think that my first book that I wrote in Arabic on this issue, I was told by one of my friend's lawyers that in a meeting in Eilat for the lawyer guild, the then general prosecutor of Israel told him, listen, the Arabs know what they have. The Arabs know here. They have the statistic. They actually know. Don't think that they don't know what's happening. What's this? I said, okay. Then we have the issue of Sheikh Jarrah and the Jewish claim for those houses, and Jerusalem Institution for Searching Israel took some 2 pages from my research saying, since you are claiming your property in East Jerusalem, the Palestinians has the right to claim their properties in Jerusalem. Now, why the Palestinians do not claim those houses? Some people, I don't see her home. Some people want to have a class suit against Israeli authorities concerning returning to their house. I recommended against. I recommended against because class suits, once you fail, you have no opening for it is sealed. Israelis sophisticated switched logic say, listen, the property in West Jerusalem, Haifa and Jaffa and all those properties are to be considered only with the negotiations about the refugees, while the properties of Jewish people from West Jerusalem in East Jerusalem is something with their right, legal right, and other rights of this. Why I wrote this book? Two things. One, you know, at the turn of the century, certain leaders of the Zionist movement, it is in the first page of the book, prefaces, said, Palestine is land with no people, for people who know it. And this was adopted by the Zionist movement. Seeing this richness and being myself victim of this Zionist movement and my family, you have to keep hammering and keep saying no. Palestine was occupied, was not empty, and when Mr. The first commissioner, Samuel, the first commission of the mandate had the survey of the population, Samuel, the results were 75,000 Jews in Palestine, close to 80, 90, 100,000 Palestinians. So it was not empty land. And we know that the population who lived in those areas now, with the refugees camp and not camps, count for close to 7 million people. This is one major, I think, drive for me to remind of this. Secondly, I think that we have a point on the quality of ourselves. We very often we beat ourselves. Very often we criticize ourselves. Very often we say we are useless. I'm telling you, from my experience, in the past and today, once the Palestinian people are given the chance, the real chance, the real opportunity, the real one, not a fake one, they are very creative. They can build themselves in very creative way. We are creative people, and we love our country, and we would stay in this country as long as we can. I will stop here. Thank you for listening. Raja, please.
Adnan, there's lots more that we can talk about, and I'm sure that there are many questions, but I will still hold my chairmanship here. And I would just like to group what I'd like to still ask you in two areas. Firstly, let's say a little bit about the past and some of the details in the book, and secondly, about the future. With regard to thanks for answering my question at the end. But one thing I was interested in, I know a little bit about, but I think just a few words might be in order about how you actually did the book. I mean, there are many stages of both of the research of the material, but also, obviously, you were out there taking photos. And I mean, how did you match the photos, for example, to the properties? I think that's an interesting, tedious perhaps, but important part of this effort. The other point regarding some of the details, okay, back to this architectural revival. Was this part of a wider architectural movement in the Arab countries at the time? I've lived in Beirut. We've all seen the sort of houses, similar in some ways, but different in other ways. But in many ways inside, you feel you're almost in the same type of house. All these, the Italian tiles, this sort of play. I mean, we see it all around in Cairo. We see it in Egypt, in Lebanon. We see them in Damascus. So I think this is an interesting aspect of how, while people, as you say in the book, added their personal touches and combined neoclassical with Andalusi and Mab'af, but there must have been this must have been part of a broader movement, and I think that's also important. And you touched on, but I think what's also very interesting is the people who live in these You mentioned all of the names in each of the blocks, the families. No Khalidis, we didn't have anything.
No, yes.
No, only in Musrata, but anyhow. Who were, I mean, you kept saying affluent, affluent, affluent. Obviously, 350 meters is affluent, but who were, so a little bit more on those before we just...
First of all, I'll start with the second question.
Mesh.
The second question, let me say, if you read the Shafiq al-Hud and Bayan and others on Jaffa, they will say, when Jaffa was Perspus Jaffa, Beirut was like a village. Beirut was a village. Beirut was built by people from Jaffa, and not only from Jaffa, but also with Lebanese, with Haifa. The same thing with Haifa. I think that I'm not chauvinistic. I don't want to. Cairo was ahead of many countries in the Middle East. But with the scale of our land, of our people, comparing with that Jordan, Lebanon, those small days, we were pioneering. And I failed to mention, I think that, it is in the book, but I could not mention everything, that one of the help or factor in building those fancy homes or houses is the availability of material. This is very known in city planning, city design, how much you have access to those materials. And we really had access to those materials. And the stones, the cutting stones, the woods, the iron, the paintings, all this has become available after the First World War. The first question. In 1952 through 1956, the Conciliation Commission, that commission that based or upon Resolution 194, resolution that talks about return of refugees, went to survey the property of the refugees in Palestine, in actually not entire Palestine, in the occupied area of Palestine. They did finished with this survey and presented to General Assembly on 66 and
1966?
Yes. And then they took the entire survey, put it in the archive, sealed, no access. Then we came on 1990, actually 98, with a committee on Palestine. They decided, I made the actual work. They decided for us that we have to go back to this archive and digitize the whole things in order to
preserve it,
protect
share
it, preserve it, and
make copies.
And later on, easy to distribute. I worked with this company in Cairo, a Canadian company, for 2 years. We did this conversion from written maps into digitized. So I was exposed to this. But at the end of my work, at the end of the work, we committed to destroy any evidence that we have with us in this work. And like a good boy, I went in the front of everybody. I burned, I cut whatever I had on this. The entire database was in my pocket because I used to go to Cairo,
CDs.
bring, make correction, come back, etc. nothing. So I came to Jerusalem with an Orient House. Riyadh asked me then, why is this important? Riyadh asked me, what is important, what we are doing? And I said, listen, let's do this. And we had
Riyadh Mansour, the
Riyadh Dajan.
Sorry.
Riyadh Dajan. And we started collecting this maps. We have the British registration, Israeli registration, Jordanian registration, etc., etc. And I concentrated in Jerusalem. I could not do the entire country. So I went to Jerusalem. I did this. So we had the data in Jerusalem. I think the data that I have in Jerusalem would cover validly, to be safe, around 85%.
Of the actual property.
Of the actual
properties. Another question related to the current status of these properties. I've had experience in some Khalidi Waqf properties of finding records that 10 years ago showed that this property was Waqf al-Khalidi originally, but today that original registration has been erased. And you mentioned in a few cases where it said it was Jewish property. So I assume that all of these properties first were taken over by the custodian of absentee property, and then eventually given, sold, whatever, to private or other. Is that?
Yes.
So today, can you prove?
Yes.
Do Israeli Tabo records today still say that this was so and so's house originally?
Israeli authorities took over and managed those properties in stages. The first year, when military officers and ordinary people rush to occupy and to have piece of this cake, then they issue emergency regulations concerning the land. Then in 1949-50, they have absentee law that have an authority, development authority, control, take care of this. But within this law, the development authority was authorized, it is governmental authority, to sell some of the properties, municipality to government institution, not to privates. This was until the 60s, where they have two laws concerning land and dwellings. For the land, then they distributed lands to the kibbutzim, moshavim, private farmers, to small portion of land. Then I think it was 120 dunams maximum, and but not selling them, but as
Lease.
as rent, as
Mu'ajjara,
free, with no money. Then in 1966 they start expanding those, and you remember that kibbutzim v'moshavim starting, and economically it was the prosperous business of building businesses start lending some of those land to gas stations, cafes, restaurants along the highway, public buildings, etc. And then came down the question of the dwellings. It was Amidar, a government company, who was authorized and intended to manage all those dwellings, houses, this
Which had been rented to the
population.
to the residents.
This is interesting. Listen. In total land controlled by Israel, 7.48 dunams owned by Palestinians. This is outside the Negev, close to 12 million dunams.
7%.
1,470,000 owned by Jews, etc. But the Israeli custodian of abandoned property reported to the UNCCP, the United Nations Conciliation Commission, in 1951 that Israel officially controlled 73,000 abandoned dwellings and 7,800 premises. Those are the premises that had a new law encouraged the tenant to buy those houses with help from government loans, etc., etc. Otherwise, they will double the rent or triple the rent for those who will buy it. So then, in the late 60s, the whole issue was sealed and private
privatization was allowed.
Privatization
Since the 60s.
and private tenants started.
So now all of these properties are owned by the people living in them?
We don't know if it's all, but some of them still, some of them
And do
still.
the records show the original
Yes,
Palestinian? Still the records.
record. Now, you say the names, and if you go to the Israeli archive and look at the ownership in 1948, actually it will be 46, not 48. This is the genuine registration of landlords. Otherwise, any piece of land or property in the area occupied by Israel was either sold illegally or transacted illegally. And ironically, we are sometimes in the UN doing very, very bad things. In 1984, the General Assembly, based on requests of the Palestinians and the Committee on Palestine, took a decision to create a fund controlled by the Secretary General that will collect revenues of those properties. In the General Assembly, you can imagine if then we started, we don't need United States for UNRWA. We need nobody with UNRWA if we had collected. Now Israel gave them the middle finger, said no, do whatever you want, and nobody continued. This actually, the resolution is still there, and you still can come with this resolution. There is not any security issue with this resolution. There is no any threat to the state of Israel or the security of Israel. This is business. It's money.
So you've taken us into the politics, and that's my last question. And then I'd be happy to let whoever would like to participate. Those of you who have done, United Nations or whatever, you look at the wording of this and notice Adnan's very personal way of talking about Jerusalem. And he refers to the western part of occupied Jerusalem. Now, I looked carefully in the text. I did find one or two mistakes where you refer to East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. Those who know Adnan, and I would share this point with him, East Jerusalem is a creation of diplomatic facts, not realities. There is Eastern, Sharqi al-Quds, and Gharbi al-Quds. One thing. So we have Eastern and Western. We have East Jerusalem now, which is enshrined in language of too many politicians, including Palestinian politicians, and West Jerusalem, but they don't have any legal real status. The only legals, then you have, of course, the Old City and the New Jerusalem, but that's maybe more of a matter of architectural and social history. But more importantly, I think, is we have something that appeared once in the United Nations resolution, in the United Nations Security Council resolution of 1980, which referred to the holy city of Jerusalem. Now, we know that was part of a moment in history where there was including the United States, supported this resolution, which referred to the holy city of Jerusalem, which, of course, is an echo of the 1947 city of Jerusalem. So what I'm leading up to here, as you're probably aware, is the question of Jerusalem still open? Is it really on the table? The question of not the question of East Jerusalem. I mean, Trump says he's taken the question of East Jerusalem off the table, of Jerusalem. But in fact, in legal terms, and in terms of unfinished business, the question of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, is there a future for the city of Jerusalem?
First of all, I'm sorry for the mistakes that you found. I hope really
No, I mean,
if you mention
most people won't consider it a
next
mistake.
sprint, I correct this. We, by habit, by I don't know, de facto things, we always made mistakes with concepts. Concepts build realities.
Yeah.
Concepts, perception build realities. Jerusalem was never recognized as two cities. Israel, and I challenge them, never set or determined the border of its western city. There is no border. This corpus separatum is still recognized by the international community as corpus separatum. The British government in particular refused since ever to recognize Western Jerusalem or the western part of Jerusalem as Western Jerusalem because they were behind the whole thing. The whole thing
Corpus
of corpus separatum. Actually, the British mandate wanted Jerusalem to be from Jerusalem to corridor to Jaffa,
bigger,
and all this. This is the
city-state.
City-state, and this is the dream was in the British. No international recognition, neither in East or West Jerusalem. Jerusalem today, entire Jerusalem is occupied. In the resolution 242, there is some different status than in 1947. In 242, recognize or talking about 1967 border lines. This is where the negotiations.
This is where East Jerusalem was born.
The negotiation with the Palestinians, with others, we're talking about the borders, the lines of 1949 that are mystic lines. Now you can accept this as partition. You can, I don't know if you have mandate, but you can ask for people mandate to do this and to decide that our claim as Palestinians will be concentrated on east of the line of the Armistice Agreement, 1949. And you can say, no, I want to open the whole thing for negotiations. Realistically speaking, we are powerless to do or to determine which way to go. But I recommend...
But legally speaking.
Internationally, legally...
We have every...
And not only that, and I think in our heart, in our mind, in our day life, we should continue. We should continue Diana, we should continue saying, this our land, those our houses, those our neighborhoods, occupied things. Otherwise, politics is
Slippery slope.
balance of power, and we are powerless to do this. We are